The fire service is a lifestyle. Some of us grew up knowing that this is what we would do. Others found it later in life. We all have a story to tell. We live a career of experience and knowledge. But what happens when we retire? All that knowledge and experience walks out the door. Welcome to Capture the Knowledge.
I met him in 1984, and he was bigger than life. I was young. I mean, I started in '82, and he was at 17. I was 19 years old when I met the guy, so I still had a kid mentality. So he was huge and mean, unbelievably. The guy was mean. Like, you talk to him and he'd growl at you, and I respected him immensely, because I was afraid of him. I'm not kidding, I was afraid. And then the years go by and you kind of grow into your body and you become a man and all that stuff, and you realize Terry's about the nicest guy on the planet, especially because he got some hearing aids and he wasn't grunting at me anymore. He could hear me. He's so stinking nice. I love him.
Do you have an incident that you remember particularly about him?
When Rio Linda Fire, when I started Rio Linda in '82, and we merged, the big merger in 1984, that's where I got to meet Terry. And so Terry was coming in from Alberta, which was this mystery land to me. I only knew Rio Linda, and these guys, it was like any other merger. It was, a little upheaval here and there and stuff like that. And he was on the other side of that, and I would just kind of stayed away from him. If he'd show up on fires, he'd be working, and if he said to do something, I did it. That was the way that went. So, because I was terrified of that guy. I swear I thought he was 8 feet tall.
What year did you start in the fire service?
1982. I was 17 and a half years old, and I went to Rio Linda Fire when it was 2 stations. And I worked out of Station 111. It was the old 111 now. It's still sitting there. I don't know what the building's doing anymore, but I worked there, and then I got moved out to 112 at 34th and Elkhorn. And I held various positions. I was... they called it night duty, so I worked from 5 p.m. till 8 a.m. The paid guys would leave at 5 p.m. and I'd replace them and man the station. I'd be there by myself at 17. Well, at that point in time, I was 18. But 18 years old, by myself. I had a choice of 2 pieces of equipment, Squad 12 or Engine 12. And depending on how the call came in, I'd roll out and hope somebody would show up to help me. And that was a long wait. It's amazing how long it takes the fire department to show up, especially when you are the fire department.
Did you get any mutual aid from North Highlands?
Yeah, I got to know a lot of those guys. We were running calls up and down Watt Avenue, and it was such a help. They'd show up with 3 people, and I was one. So, if you can imagine showing up and doing CPR on a guy. I still remember Bob Santee just saving the day, multiple times showing up as a firefighter. Of course, he always had something to say to me. But that's just, that was our relationship, and it was a great one, and we worked well together, and those guys really helped me out and kept me pushing towards, moving on to a different fire department, which I did. I ended up being Rancho Cordova, and amazingly enough, fast forward 30 plus years later, I worked with the same dudes that I started with in the same area, so that was pretty funny.
Funny how that comes around, isn't it?
Yeah, you don't want to burn bridges, I'll tell you that much.
Not in the fire service.
No. You just don't.
Which can be a hard thing sometimes.
Yeah, well, next thing you know, you wind up with the guy in your property and you realize, oh gosh, I hope I didn't burn a bridge, because this interview might not go well. Gosh, I hope I didn't say something bad. I did that on occasion.
We all do.
Yeah.
We all do.
Yeah, absolutely. That fire service is, it's a tough arena that you're playing in all the time. There's just a lot of personalities, a lot of larger than life personalities. I think if you went out to the general population and asked them to describe a firefighter, they would be about 90% right on all of us. And it wouldn't matter age, creed, man, woman, it doesn't matter. We all basically cut from the same cloth. That can lead to some bridge burning sometimes, because our egos get a little ahead of ourselves sometimes. So.
And how would you describe a firefighter?
Shoot, from my viewpoint now, crazy. I actually talked to my son about becoming a firefighter, and I realized that I hid the truth from him for years. He didn't know. He just grew up in the fire service as a son of a firefighter, but he didn't know what I was doing. He didn't know what I was doing, what I had seen, what I had experienced, and then I had to think about whether I wanted my son to be involved in something like that. Dude, I want him to see or experience some of the things that I'd seen or experienced. And as a dad, the answer was no. As from man to man, I mean, this kid's a college football player. It fit the bill for him. The camaraderie, the teamwork, the physicality, the locker room hijinks, I mean, the dinners, there's everything. The lifelong friends is perfect. But then there's that other piece of it. So as a dad, and that's the only way I can look at it now. It's been enough years. I've been out for 5.5 years. And so I feel like I can hop into a BC ride and still run a call. I don't know that I could hop into the captain's seat and do stuff. Seems like technology's changed a little bit, and maybe some of the standard operating procedures have changed a little, but maybe I could do that too. But I'm not as strong as I was. I'm a little broke down and stoved up from different injuries here and there and all that. But I have to look at that way, with my son. Do you want to, as a dad, do I want you to experience that stuff? And that answer was no. So he ended up not becoming a firefighter. I think he has a little bit of regrets in regards to that, but not so much from my standpoint. I'm glad he didn't do it, because I couldn't imagine him being on that big Dixie fire that's going on right now. Or if I placed him in some of the situations that I had been in. And my wife does, she doesn't know, my kids don't, my son finally knows, but there were some times that were not, like, I don't know why I'm sitting here. Those type of things. Why would I want to put my son into something like that?
We've got a lot of young firefighters in our department now, a lot of young firefighters. And how can you take your experience and pass that on to them to keep them ideally out of those situations, but recognizing that we are going to end up in those situations every once in a while? What kind of advice would you give the younger crowd now?
I was thinking about this morning. There's one specific time where both me and Forrest Rowell were in a spot, and I'm not sure why I'm not sure how we lived. And it's no joke. I mean, of course, the two of us together were jokesters at an epic level through our career and stuff, but there was that one instant, that one split-second time period where, for whatever reason, things didn't happen the way they should have, and we did not even get hurt. And when you look at the list of mistakes that were made along the way, the things that we did wrong, and going all the way back to the things that went wrong from the initial arrival, none of them in and of itself were that big of a deal. None of them. But they all got stitched together. And I know that we've heard this in various ways. You get into training programs and you hear guys will have some mantra about, these type of things, or maybe you'll review close call scenarios. But I would say really look at the small things, all the way down to where a guy parks a vehicle. That had something to do with our near miss. Or the training of a probie. The probie made a mistake, one small mistake, but it almost cost 2 firefighters their lives. And the lack of communication, or the wrong type of communication, all very small things in and of themselves, but they all lined up. And I, to this day, cannot tell you why we did not burn to death right there in front of everybody. It didn't happen. And clearly I'm thankful for that, but I mean, my kids wouldn't have existed, then none of this would be happening right now. And you gotta, if you have that, if you understand what that is, then maybe you won't be so cavalier or flippant about some of the smaller mistakes. It doesn't mean go ride somebody about it, but it certainly means check yourself and check your scenarios look at what you got going on, and see where you could have done better. Because the trickle down of that simple mistake could cost somebody dearly. And that's a real deal. That's, there's so many aspects of input out there where you can get your training. You can get on training on your cell phone. You can go to classes. You can listen to videos like this. It's just so easy to get locked into that stuff. It's just, open that horizon up. Look at it as much as you can. Keep your head on a swivel and recognize those mistakes and learn from every stinking call that you go on. You have to learn and be critical. Be critical of yourselves. And if you got a good crew and you can be critical of each other, then work on trying to not make those mistakes again. Because it really could cost somebody something. I'm telling you this, the rig spot alone was such a big deal, and it was a matter of 10 feet of placement. And who would ever sit there and think that they would have to go back and train on rig spot in relation to a fire and having a 10-foot difference? But that made such a huge difference. That was one mistake. There was about 8 of them that went along there, and we should have been dead.
Looking at that incident now, is there a way that you, as a captain, right?
I was a firefighter.
You're a firefighter.
Yeah.
Okay. That you, as a firefighter, could have recognized that this didn't go right, that didn't go right. Gordon Graham calls it the holes in the Swiss cheese are starting to line up for something bad to happen. Is there a way that you, as a firefighter, could have recognized that these things are stacking up?
I think so. I think now with the capacity of the David Clark headset systems and being able to talk, this is before that. We were on a Quint. We had an old Quint back then, and Forrest and I were firefighters riding backwards outside. So it was not an enclosed cab, and our captain did not have the ability to communicate to us. And actually, when I piled off, I was by the engineer. So the input I was getting was from him, but he was not setting up our, what our plan of attack was going to be. So I was getting a little bit of input, but I had to go around to actually see what was going on. But there were some things that went along the way, and arson, the windows were blackened, couldn't see where the fire was, didn't even know where the captain was. It just knew that we were going to vent, and it was in the incipient stages of truck work. So Forrest and I have been working on so many scenarios to bring truck work to our fire department, and we just knew that we were going to vent. And I couldn't tell you after all these years. I want to say this is probably 1989 or 1990 or something like that. I just knew that that's what we were doing. We were venting. And so there's some questions, there's something that it used to be kind of the mantra back when I was starting to become battalion chief, and that was leader's intent. Leader's intent, I've found that in the fire service, if we name something, the value of what's gone on or what that thing's supposed to mean kind of disappears. But the reality is there's some questions within leader's intent that I did not have. So leader's intent specifically is what the leader wants. So it would be what my captain would want, what it's supposed to look like, and why. That would have closed the loop knowledge-wise for me. Maybe my positioning, where I was standing, I could have seen something different had I understood that. But I blindly just went into the vent mode, and so did Forrest. Forrest hopped off on the fire side, and it was a strip mall fire and arson. I think I mentioned that earlier. But we were just so task-oriented, and the two of us together at the time, I would have put us up against anybody on the planet. We were so unbelievably aggressive and hard-hitting, and obviously to the point where we did not go into the situation fully knowledgeable. Did not understand what my captain's intent was for our job. I mean, venting, that's great, but in the overall plan of things, why am I venting? Well, it's clear if you look in a textbook, but in this particular situation, why were we venting? It would have helped me understand that what we were facing was a backdraft situation. I didn't know that. I didn't understand that. I didn't look. My head wasn't on a swivel. I was in my 20s, and Forrest and I were, like I said, just so stinking aggressive. And all we wanted to do was win. And so we missed stuff. That's where our mistakes were happening. And then we hopped on that ladder going up to the roof. There wasn't any smoke, so to speak. So our masks were hanging around our neck. We had our hands loaded up with tools. And what we didn't know is that we were spotted directly over the fire. So our ladder, climbing off that quint, was directly over the fire. And this is where the probie came in and did a great golf swing with his pickaxe to drop that glass in the door, which probably should have been the window, but it didn't matter in our situation. What we saw was all the glass go in. It never hit the ground. So what's the next thing that's supposed to happen?
It all comes back out.
Yep, and it did not. And I do not know why. I can't tell you why that happened. It was, and the two of us stopped for that second and watched it. And then we just continued on, did our deal. So I presented that story to my son, and I'm like, man, I don't want you to be in a situation like that. My mom, she doesn't know that I did anything like that. I wasn't married at the time and stuff. So, but even moving forward, I never told anybody about that stuff. These things can happen. They can happen to somebody today. And, you know, and it was nighttime. I mean, there was a lot of reasons why we didn't see stuff. But the point is that you have multiple mistakes lined up. It can happen today. And then something happens, right? So the Dixie Fire, multiple mistakes, and all of a sudden the tree's falling on somebody, right? Or you're in the wrong spot, somebody read the map wrong, and you're getting dumped on by one of those big tankers and someone gets hurt. I mean, there's a lot of things that can happen, you know?
You retired as a battalion chief. You spent many years as a captain and obviously many years as a firefighter. You also taught in some of the academies.
Mm-hmm.
You spent a lot of time training people.
I did.
And how would you recommend that firefighters train to prevent the kind of situation you were in from becoming dangerous to them? Obviously, it's always going to be dangerous, but you know what I mean when I say learning how to recognize it. What would you want your people training on?
I can tell you that just because I relay this story does not necessarily mean that's going to save anybody's life, right? Because it's dynamic. Your situations are always dynamic. So one thing, you brought up the captain. Apparently today I'm going to talk a lot about mistakes I made. When I was a captain at Station 24, at the time it was one of 3 stations that were always the busiest. So it was 24, 41, and 53 were always in a battle for who's the busiest station on the planet, and we loved it. It was just one of those things. I got there after my first academy. My first academy was the 002 class, and I was a drill instructor there. And then I was a drill instructor in the 1-2 class. And then I was a drill master in 6-2. So I was a captain at this point in time at Station 24. And I was feeling like I was leading the charge for turning civilians that wanted to be firefighters, giving them every opportunity they could to become a firefighter. And those assignments were wonderful. And I went back to the firehouse and jumped right back into running calls. And so training, I mean, it was just such a big part of what I had going on at Station 24. Probably still is a probie house, and I mean, there's a lot of training that went on there. And we, the guys at Station 24, and you know, you were there too. We were proud and arrogant of our shifts and what we did, and we were taking care of our people out there and doing all this stuff. And here's where I made the big mistake. I clearly understood traffic patterns. The college, take the college for example. I mean, it's a super dynamic target hazard, right? I knew that place like the back of my head. The traffic patterns for when kids were coming to school and when they weren't, all these things. I knew where the hydrants were. I knew the hazmat stuff, all that stuff. You know what I did with Station 108, 103, 23, Truck 23 in relation to any of that knowledge? Nothing. I did nothing. And so that was a culture that was not only Station 24's. that was how our fire department was. We didn't have much of a training division. We didn't have guys like you that were in the training division. We've been decimated by financial budget cuts and stuff like this, and so we left our own devices. Well, we built a wall around Station 24's area, and that's the way we did it. Sure, we'd pass on information shift to shift, but that didn't help Engine 108, who's going to come in and have to do a water supply, right? Or 103, who's going to be, grab another hose line. And it wasn't until I became a battalion chief that I realized that mistake. So in relation to talking about these things, I would say I don't have all the answers. I know I can't even say I know almost all the mistakes I've done. I have no idea. There was a lot of things that I did, good, bad, and otherwise, in the fire service. When you're looking towards, just the thing to say to jumpstart something, I would say work with the other guys. Work with the other stations. Multi-company drills, it was, back in the day, they were always like on a Sunday, and they were always driven by the battalion chief, who wasn't doing any of the work that we were doing. It was just, pulling a hose across the parking lot and hooking to a hydrant. That has its place. It does. But how does it keep a guy from getting hung up in a backdraft situation and recognizing that a bunch of mistakes that happened along the way and get out of it safely and then continue working? Pulling hose in the parking lot doesn't do that. But that's what our multi-company drills were back in the day. And so, sure, there'd be a lot of communication amongst the crews at that point in time, but it wasn't in relation to anything that was real. And so I would say, look at your target hazards, and actually even back up on that, identify what a target hazard is. You know how many times we would sit there and look at telestaff and realize that somebody, let's say an engineer working at, overtime engineer at Station 41, was not familiar with the area. Maybe it was a guy that worked at in the south area all the time. He's working overtime there now. We have an advantage of beating them to their first in and getting work done, right? So he's going to be slower. Wouldn't that be a little bit of a target hazard? I mean, wouldn't it have been a better idea for me to call up the captain at 41 and say, hey, let's do some area familiarization training together? Or, hey, let's bring your engineer over into 24s, because when you guys come and give us a water supply, these are some things that you might need to know, and help that station enhance their knowledge. Wouldn't that be the better way to do things? And I believe so. When I got to Battalion 7, I'm sitting there, my first meeting or whatever you want to call it, I'm sitting there looking at a bunch of captains. Some of them had more experience than I did, And so I'm sitting there looking at them. They want to hear about my backdraft story or Station 24 stuff. No, they don't want to hear anything about this stuff. But I'm new to the battalion. I need to learn. So I pushed it onto them. Teach me. I need to learn. But I had to break that mold of sitting in my own little area, worrying about only Battalion 7 higher level chief stuff. The reality is I needed to know where these guys' target hazards were, what they were worried about, things that were bothering them. And the only way that we could do that is if we were working together. So we did. And my time as battalion chief was so different than as a captain. And I'm sure guys could sit back and say I was being hypocritical. And maybe that's how it looked. I was just realizing that I was ignorant and didn't want to be that. I had to be in a position to get the resources for the guys that were having problems. That was what my job was. And if I couldn't even understand globally what was going on because we weren't working together, I'm never going to be in the spot to be able to do that. So that was a long answer for a question that I can't even remember what you asked me. But the reality is that there isn't one thing to do here, but you got to work together. So shift to shift, station to station, neighboring stations, work together. As you're working on that parking lot drill, so-and-so may bring up an experience or a target hazard or something they want to train on next week. Pay attention, listen. It might be because they're worried about it. I didn't run around for the next 30 years talking about how Forrest and I were nearly killed. I didn't do any of that stuff. I didn't actually train for that scenario or recognize the mistakes that were made and get myself into a good spot to train. I just carried that as my dark little secret because that almost happened and scared the you-know-what out of me and him. He'll tell you it didn't scare him, but I can tell you that's not the case. He was scared, so was I. But we moved on, and we moved on for years. I think those kind of things are mistakes. I really do. I think we need to talk about that stuff, work it out, figure out a better way to look at some of the things that are going on in the fire service, and train to not have that happen. So it's not all task work, you know?
Good communications. What I'm hearing is good communications, being open about what you did, what went well, what didn't go well, making sure that everybody's on the same page, that everyone's got the same information to digest and process, make good decisions based off of.
Right.
A lot of communication stuff.
Yeah,
open
definitely
transparency.
Definitely, and not radio communications. I mean, there's radio communications. I mean, you take any class out there on how to go through assessment centers, it's a lot on how you communicate on the radio, but it really needs to be what you're communicating on the radio. And I made a significant change as battalion chief. I figured I wasn't going to get in trouble. No one was going to take my birthday away. I would speak clearly and the best English that I know how, which is just butchered, but it's the way it is. And I would ask questions. You know how many times I've seen guys, somebody say something on the radio, and the battalion chief or incident commander, whoever, would write something down, and you're looking at that going, I don't think that's what the guy said. And there's no follow-up question. Ask the question. If you don't hear it, how about this one? Engine Medic 109 show up, and Medic 109 assigns itself or gets assigned by the engine somewhere. They just become part of the machine that's happening, put the fire out. And more resources come. What are the chances that BC is going to lose where Medic 109 went? I would say there's a great chance. And why is that? Because it's happened to me. So what did I do? The communication piece for me, clear, plain communication, was I'd turn around and ask, what are you guys doing? Because it would help me out. It would help me understand where they're at, what they're doing. If they were in a position to have some need fulfilled or something, they would just be better positioned. So yeah, so that's to me where the communication piece would come in. It's not, going through and being calm and clear and concise on the radio and saying all the fire vernacular that you need to say and, checkboxing this and all that other stuff. Hey, things get lost. Things get lost. Guys are working hard. They get scared. Maybe they can't accomplish their goal. Maybe they're trying to talk through that mask. You can't hear them. Those things happen, although maybe technology's fixed that now, but there are times when things aren't clear. Do you hear the battalion chiefs out there clearing that up? That's the question. If it's not happening, then captains drive that because it's you guys' lives on the line, not the BC out there. So clear it up. If you believe that the guy didn't hear you or you need some acknowledgement that you were understood, then clear it up and let it become part of the thing. Let that communication thing happen two ways so that we understand what's going on. And I recognize on most house fires, we're talking about a 5 to 10 minute period where it can be hairy. That's fine. Those 5 to 10 minute period, I can tell you, was about a 5-second period where me and Forrest were almost killed. So fix that stuff. Fix that stuff so you don't have to have some tragic story that you're carrying around with you. And understand that classes are just that. They're classes. Take the information and utilize it out in the field the best way you can. Tweak it, own it. Do what you got to do, and make sure that you're in a good position to support your people. So that's from firefighter all the way up. So that's kind of how I dealt with it at Battalion 7.
A teenager approaches you, tells you they're interested in joining the fire service. What advice do you give them?
My first advice is finish school. Finish school, not high school, but college. Finish your college degree and get something that will help you in case you get hurt. And I realize that I'm being a hypocrite about this, but because I went and got my college degree in fire stuff. right? So if I had gotten hurt, I either could have hoped to get into some prevention job somewhere, maybe with the private company, or I could be a DJ spinning 80s tunes, because that's what my skill set was. So, although it became popular again, so I mean, maybe I would have made a lot of money, but I did not have something to fall back on. And so I would absolutely say finish school, get yourself educated, plus it helps to, as you move on, if you get some incentives, or they change some of the parameters for maybe promoting to the chief level, and where you need a 4-year degree. But I would absolutely say do that for sure. Definitely get your education. And if you want to do it, if that's in your core that you want to do that, really explore what that means. And I mean, we've all seen them. There's guys in our department that serving the public is a pain in their you-know-whats now. And sometimes they came in that way, sometimes they get jaded. That's, people have issues like that, but you don't want to be like that. You're supposed to take a knee to the public, right? You're a servant. So what does a servant do? A servant go in there and, tell everybody what they're supposed to do, or are they supposed to serve? And that's, getting your head right about what that means going in will help. It's going to be a lot of years on a medic, serving the public in a way that's, that can be demeaning to a person that's gone through a lot of training to become a firefighter. That's a tough spot to be in. It's something I did not have to do as much as some of the guys online now.
And that's something that has been challenging lately with a ton of mandatory overtime. So what does Mike Daw say to the guys that are feeling frustrated?
Well, this isn't sustainable, so you got to know it's going to end at some point in time. But the frustrations, I feel terrible. As much as I've tried to remove myself from the fire service over the years just so I can live my life, I feel terrible about summer times and the overtime, the mandatories, the perceived work ethic, that the perception that it's dropping, and the guys that have to pick up the pieces. You're away from your families for half the time, missing birthday parties, all this stuff. I did some of that, not all of it. I did some of it. Not in the same way that's happening now. It's different now in relation to this. And I missed stuff. I did. And my son's fine. So in the moment, it feels terrible. But my son is fine with the way that he grew up. So in the moment, it's the worst thing ever. Just go to work and be a good servant. Save your money, invest it, get ready for retirement, be safe. I mean, look at what mandatory is. We can all get behind it and say, yeah, it's a forced deal. It's just a secondary overtime list that guys work. They don't sign up so they can catch the Mando, so they get to the bottom of the Mando list and all that, But sometimes you can't escape it, especially when you're coming on. You're already doing 48s. I came from a time when we did 24s. So you weren't getting stuck automatically in a 72-hour shift. That wasn't happening. So it happens a lot now. 96s, I mean, that gets old. I think it's happening at breakneck pace.
Yeah, we've been busy. We've been busy. Probably 20 to 30 mandatory overtime shifts a day.
That's just
across
brutal.
the 3 ranks. It's tough.
It is just brutal, and that's demoralizing. And at the end of the day, someone's calling 911 and expecting to be served. And you got somebody who's not feeling good about what's happening to them. That's important. I used to always tell the guys when I was battalion chief that I was, that all I was logistics. That my job was logistics. I was, had a leadership position on telestaff. It showed that I was the leader of the battalion. At the end of a call, it showed that I was the incident commander and everything else. But really, what was I doing? I mean, when you talk about a simple CAN report, if you get your head wrapped around this CAN report, I think if everybody does, the world's going to be a heck of a lot easier, because you are recognizing what your conditions are, and you own them because you're in it. Let's say you're in a hot, smoky environment. You think the incident commander's doing that? Nope. So that's your conditions to have. Your actions are the actions that you own. And so where does battalion chief come in? When that guy needs something, right? So hopefully, I've done my job and I've at least prepped. I'm looking at smoke. I'm looking at intensity and and pressure, smoke coming out and flames and this and that. And you know, I have an internal benchmark on when things should be starting to turn down, and we're not turning down. The guys may not even know that I've gone over to the other channel and asked dispatch for some more resources. Why is that? Because I have a feeling this guy in here might need something, and man, if I didn't position myself to give him what he needed, I'm not doing my job. That's logistics. And yet it'll show me as, you know, the top of the heap on the org chart. But even then, that org chart, if you think about before that fire call, sure, telestaff would show me in charge of the battalion, right? But then the call comes down. What happens to that org chart? It gets super linear, doesn't it? I have a job as I'm driving to the call, which I got to tell you, for those who've never sat in that seat, that's dangerous. You're real small out there breaking through intersections. But my job is to relay to dispatch what's going on. So I have some benchmarks I have to hit, you know, switching over to the TAC channel, acknowledging, you know, information that's coming in from dispatch, maybe disseminating something that came up on the MDT, making sure the guys know. Very simple, but I'm not part of the org chart. I'm not in charge of anything. I'm just doing that job. Just like the captains on scene are navigating for their engineers to get there. Then the first guy shows up. That org chart starts building. He's in charge. He's at the top of this heap. This thing's starting to get it's not linear anymore. It's now become that triangle we recognize. That captain is now in charge. I don't even have the authority to take command. I got to ask him for permission, and that's determined on whether he's ready, whether he's hit certain benchmarks, and whether he's comfortable with the information he's giving me. It happens at breakneck pace. Believe me, they don't want it. They want to go in and do it. But the process of doing that, going through that, I'm the battalion chief, can I please be in charge? It's so unbelievably humbling. And you realize that all those initial decisions made by the captains on scene are so unbelievably important. And if we were not training together, we wouldn't have smooth transition. It's not about what I said on the radio to pass a test. It's about what I'm going to do to support this guy's operation he just spent time building. And if you think that ain't tough, he's got an engineer that's trying to manage tank water and a firefighter who's probably starting to engage to some degree what the emergency is. And this guy's sitting in the cab on the radio, doesn't want to be there. Talking about a tremendous job. The only thing I can do is graciously accept the command position from him, take what he's built and move that thing forward, and then be in a position to supply what he needs. Logistics. That's what I am. And to me, that's a great position to be in if you're a student of leadership. Because the leadership, it doesn't matter if these guys now following me, I'm the leader, I'm now in charge. It's not a matter of that. This is a plan built by another person. Sure, we could all say that, yeah, that's what it was. We would all have done the same thing. But that person did it. And now that guy needs to know that I'm going to be able to support him and be able to do that. The CAN report's brilliant. I've used it when I've mentored. I've used it in the business world when I've mentored stuff, because, you know, people that are trying to build better leadership or management or get out of the linear organization charts that they have. It's real easy to get linear. I used it when I was executive director of the Firefighters Burn Institute. Same thing. I would build in this CAN report as something that I would be doing as a support role, even though I was a leader. And like I said, it's humbling. And I would also suggest that each and every one of you guys take a bite of humble pie every day. I'm telling you, it tastes like doo-doo. It does. But you know what? When you take that bite, you're not surprised. That's a key right there. You don't want to be bowled over because it tastes terrible. Just be ready for it, so you know. And it is humbling taking or getting command from somebody, or facing your mistakes, or having something go wrong. It's even humbling watching people do fantastic work. Man, to see what I saw through that windshield with some of the captains and firefighters and the tremendous work they did, I was so unbelievably honored to be in that spot, to be a firefighter, to be part of that whole machine that had been there for a couple hundred years before me. it's a good position to be in. And true to that statement, I'm humbled to be here right now. The thought that you would even ask me, like, what I have to say is valued by anybody. The guys that worked with me that may watch this are going to have a lot of stuff to say. And there's people out there that I'm sure didn't appreciate my style or like what I had going on and stuff. And that's okay. I don't have the answers, and I don't profess to have the answers. I just know what worked for me when I was making mistakes, when I didn't think things were going right. And there isn't a test or class or any of that that helps with that. You just got to dig deep, sit there with a nice plate of humble pie, take some bites, and then figure a way out of it that's going to best benefit what you got going on out there. So the question being, the core, what is the core of the fire service? Clearly the word service is the core, but it has so many meanings. Years back, we went through a strategic planning process where our core values got rewritten very in wordy fashion, but they used to be honor, courage, and devotion, duty. But if you look at the core values we have today, they still are that. And when you're talking about service and being able to apply service, especially in these times where call volumes have gone up exponentially, where mandatories are there, you have to have a level of devotion and duty that supersedes a normal human being to be able to still commit to applying that service to people you don't know. Sometimes, you look at it and go, man, I don't even know if these people deserve it, but they called. So how do you do it? You have to be courageous. You have to fight something that could kill you. And the honorable piece stretches through all aspects of the fire service. So it's everything from whether you're going to badmouth somebody to, understanding the value of walking into somebody's home and being gracious about that. If you look at the core and you break that up into honor, courage, and devotion, duty, it covers everything that you're ever going to need. Those dark times where you don't want to be at work, think about it. Think about those three things and understand the core for what we have is related to those core values, and it applies specifically to you being a servant, which sounds very degrading, but it's one of the most honorable professions in the world. There is nothing like the fire service of the United States, and you guys get to be part of that. You're lucky to be part of it, definitely. And I'm glad to have you there. I'm glad that you're doing that job. And I'm glad I'm not doing it anymore because I'm too old.
All right. Mike Daw.
Yes, sir.
Jokester. As always. Retired battalion chief. How many years of service?
33.5. Almost to the day.
33.5 years of service.
Yeah.
Thank you for your time in the fire service, and thanks for meeting with me today on Capture the Knowledge.
You're very welcome. Thanks for having me. I'm very honored. Appreciate it.